Today in John Wesley's Journal is a podcast produced by the Wesley Center at Chattanooga, the United Methodist Student Center. In this podcast, we will learn about early Methodism by following John Wesley through his journal, as he and others begin a movement that would give rise to the Methodist Church in all its forms. So sit back and let's see what happened today in John Wesley's Journal. Welcome back to Today in John Wesley's Journal for January 15th, 1736. But before we get to John Wesley's Journal, let's look at some other things that happened on this day in church history. This date marks the death of Paul of Thebes in 341 AD. Also known as Paul the First Hermit, he is remembered as one of the earliest Christian hermits. Seeking the wilderness as an escape from persecution, his example of solitary prayer and ascetic poverty would inspire people like Antony the Great to lead a monastic life. Jerome tells us that Antony found Paul's body after his death at about 113 years old. He was sitting upright, arms lifted in his final prayer, and dressed in a tunic he had woven for himself from palm fronds. At the close of his biography on Paul of Thebes, Jerome leaves us with this commentary. I may be permitted, at the end of this little treatise, to ask those who do not know the extent of their possessions, who adorn their homes with marble, who string house to house and field to field, what did this old man in his nakedness ever lack? Your drinking vessels are of precious stones. He satisfied his thirst with the hollow of his hand. Your tunics are of wrought gold. He had not the raiment of the meanest of your slaves. But on the other hand, poor though he was, paradise is open to him. You, with all your gold, will be received in the Gehenna. He, though naked, yet kept the robe of Christ. You, clad in your silks, have lost the vesture of Christ. On this day in 1702, Isaac Watts became the pastor of Newington. Watts was a prolific hymn writer, and at least 15 of his hymns are currently appearing in the United Methodist Hymnal. These titles include O God, our help in ages past, I sing the almighty power of God, and of course, Joy to the World. The first hymn of his is found right next to Charles Wesley's hymn, O for a Thousand Tongues to Sing, and that's saying something for Methodists. Here is the text of that hymn. I'll praise my Maker while I've breath. I'll praise my Maker while I've breath, and when my voice is lost in death, praise shall employ my nobler powers. My days of praise shall ne'er be past, while life and thought and being last, or immortality endures. Happy are they whose hopes rely on Israel's God, who made the sky and earth and seas with all their reigns, whose truth forever stands secure, who saves the oppressed and feeds the poor, for none shall find God's promise vain. The Lord pours eyesight on the blind, the Lord supports the fainting mind, and sends the laboring conscience peace. God helps the stranger in distress, the widow and the fatherless, and grants the prisoner sweet release. I'll praise my God who lends me breath, and when my voice is lost in death, praise shall employ my nobler powers. My days of praise shall ne'er be past, while life and thought and being last, or immortality endures. And earlier this week, today, Martin Luther King Jr. was born on this day in 1929. He would go on to lead the fight for equality and civil rights in the U.S. His life and family were threatened numerous times, and his enemies would eventually take his life. But he was perhaps more dismayed by the silence of the moderate white church, as he called them, who did not seem to share his sense of urgency. Here is a quote from his letter from a Birmingham jail. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice, and that when they fail in this purpose, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. I had hoped that the white moderate would understand that the present tension in the South is a necessary phase of the transition from an obnoxious negative peace in which the Negro passively accepted his unjust plight to a substantive and positive peace in which all men will respect the dignity and worth of human personality. Actually, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. And earlier this week, a group of German pastors published the Altona Confession on the 11th of January 1933. It was in response to the events of July 1932, in which paramilitary forces sympathetic to Adolf Hitler and his nationalistic views battled government forces in the streets of Altona near Hamburg, Germany. 18 people were left dead. Hitler would call the dead Nazis Christian martyrs, and his language fomented further violence. The Altona Confession rejected the German church's growing political alliance and the nationalism it baptized. This anti-Nazi movement was led by Hans Asmussen. This pursuit of justice would cost him his pulpit. It would cost others like Dietrich Bonhoeffer their life. And now John Wesley's journal for today, January 17th, 1736. Complaint being made to Mr. Oglethorpe of the unequal distribution of the water among the passengers, he appointed new officers to take charge of it. At this, the old ones and their friends were highly exasperated against us, to whom they imputed the change. But the fierceness of man shall turn to thy praise. And now we return to our time, but we'll be back on the 17th for another entry in John Wesley's journal. Have a good day.